Of course, one of the big stories of the campaign has been the economy, and in tandem with that is what's going on with our deficit and our debt. Republicans have been making quite a bit about this lately, and according to the Congressional Budget Office, the projection is that the federal debt is going to surpass 90% of our gross domestic product, that is the goods and services produced in the country within a decade, up to about 200% of our GDP by 2037 and reach 230% of GDP by 2040. Well, that's a recipe for disaster. Clearly, the question is, how are they coming to these figures and what do they really mean to you? So joining us is Michael Peterson. Michael Peterson is President, Chief Operating Officer of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, and joins us. Welcome back to POTUS. Thanks for being here this morning.
Good morning, Tim. Thanks for having me.
The big challenge, of course, whenever the Congressional Budget Office does anything is what are their assumptions? And you've looked very closely at this. Is there anything that you look at that gives you a glimmer of hope that this, without changing policy, is not going to happen, or is it just a disaster unless something is done?
Well, I think it's very clear that on our current path, the fiscal outlook is totally unsustainable. You quoted the right numbers. The best way to look at the level of federal debt is as a share of the economy. Most economists suggest not exceeding 60%. We're already at 70%, and they say it's dangerous to go above 90%, and that's exactly where we're headed. And there's nothing new here. This is really the most predictable economic and fiscal crisis in history. The factors leading to it are well known. We've got a baby boom generation that is very large, 80 million strong, that's beginning to retire. They're all living longer, which is terrific, but it does create longer periods of retirement. And we've got an out-of-control healthcare system where the costs are growing tremendously. So these are very predictable factors. What the CBO has put together reflects all those things, and there's really nothing to dispute there. The question is, how do we deal with it?
And deal with it, I think, and I think you point this out in your analysis of this, and that is that in the short term, there is a concern that any kind of sudden action to stem the tide of the growth of the debt is going to result in a stalling of the economy. So this has to be a combination of maybe some short-term, but really a lot of long-term planning, correct?
Well, listen, the really dangerous part of the fiscal path is the long term. I mean, when we're okay where we are right now. We're in the middle of an economic recovery. And you need to put in place long-term measures to be sure, but there is this delicate balance you need to strike between austerity and growth. In order to fix the fiscal situation, you need, obviously, major spending reforms. We believe you need revenue to make it politically feasible. But the other thing you need is the economy to be strong. So if you implement measures too quickly and too abruptly, that ends up contracting the economy, which actually makes your deficit problem somewhat worse, too. So you have to strike the right balance between the timing and implementation of austerity in order to foster some economic growth to, again, make for a better economic situation and also help your fiscal situation.
So is there something to be said about the economy improving will also take care of some of the revenue shortfall?
Yeah, no, absolutely. If we can, the best way to deal with this problem is to have significant economic growth. Obviously, that everyone is in favor of that. We're obviously going to need some fiscal reforms, but as I said, if you implement them too abruptly, too significantly, too fast, you end up hurting this very fragile recovery, and that makes your problem a little bit worse. So it is a delicate balance you need to strike between the timing and implementation of some of these reforms.
Michael Peterson is President, Chief Operating Officer of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. I know you don't get in the business of endorsing candidates, but I'd like to know if you've heard anything from either President Barack Obama or Republican Mitt Romney in terms of proposals that makes sense in terms of attacking this debt and deficit issue.
Well, I think that this is a very big problem, and it's going to involve a lot of difficult decisions, but it is doable. We've seen many solutions across the board. Simpson-Bowles was obviously the best well-known commission that put together a very successful report that solved the problem, that had significant bipartisan report. You had Domenici-Rivlin, their task force did similar things. And last year, our foundation sponsored 6 think tanks from across the political spectrum, all of whom solved this challenge. So it's actually a very fixable challenge. And the point is, if you deal with it sooner rather than later, the measures are more palatable and easier to put in place. Listen, as you said, we're a nonpartisan foundation, so we don't sponsor or endorse any candidates, but I do wish they were talking about this more, because I think one of the things that needs to happen is the American people needs to get involved with this. It's a very significant challenge, and in order to get them involved and educated, the candidates should be talking about it and explaining the trade-offs.
They are talking about it. The problem is they're talking about it in very simple terms and in very partisan terms, and that's I guess, was what makes solutions more difficult. And I'm also wondering if maybe because of the comprehensive nature of the issue, the complexity of the problem, that sometimes this is one of those cases where you almost have to do a lot rather than do piecemeal. You can't, for example, just adjust revenues or adjust expenses or costs, because you have to do almost all of this in tandem. And it seems to me that this is one of those cases where you have to have some sort of a comprehensive solution. Otherwise, it may be doomed to failure.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think you really need to look across the entire budget to solve this challenge, and people can debate whether that's easier done in piecemeal form and deal with Social Security, then deal with health care, then deal with revenues. In my opinion, at least, I think it's much easier politically to do it all at once, because there's a lot of trade-offs, and it's much easier to get both sides to bless an entire package in its entirety in a comprehensive form, because there's things they do like in there, maybe some things they don't like. And, it's like putting together any deal. If you have a lot of things to work with, it's a little easier to get political support.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how it goes. I love your optimism, if nothing else.
Well, I got to get out of bed in the morning like everybody else. So.
That's right. If people want to read about this, what's the website where they can go online?
Well, www.pgpf.org. We've got a lot of fiscal facts and information. We've got reviews of the CBO report. We've got videos and multimedia. There's a lot of things where you can go and see and learn about this issue, because I think it's very important for the American people to get a grasp of it and understand it so they can support solutions.
And I promise you that your eyes will not glaze over, because it's done in a form that even simple people like me can understand it. So we appreciate you being on with us as always. Thanks for being here this morning.
Thanks for having me. Take care.